The latest video game war is heating up tonight. Nintendo's GameCube system is about to hit the stores.
Uhrenwürfel mit 15 Zentimetern im Quadrat.
Well, Roland, it's all part of a $75 million marketing campaign.
We're just waiting for the GameCube to come out. Everybody's so anxious to play with it and everything.
This year, Nintendo is featuring everything from Super Monkey Ball to Wave Race.
In February 2007, Nintendo quietly ceased production on the GameCube console. After 5.5 years of production and 21 million units sold, it was time to move on. Sony's PlayStation 2 demolished the GameCube in sales, with nearly 6 times as many consoles sold. Microsoft's Xbox also outsold the GameCube, although only by a few million units. While the GameCube was the least popular of the main 3 6th-generation consoles, between its legendary library, impressive power, innovative accessories, and sleek design, the GameCube offered much more than it was given credit for at the time. More powerful than the PS2, and nearly as powerful as the Xbox, despite being half its size, the GameCube was a technical marvel, yet the casual consumer brushed it off as a kid's console. That stigma stuck with the GameCube throughout its life and even extends to today. Between the colorful controller buttons, purple color of the console, miniature discs, and a lunchbox-esque handle, it was easy to see why the GameCube was so easily misjudged. Looking at the GameCube without bias reveals a console that deserved a lot more recognition. The controller was so well designed that every Nintendo console since has backwards compatibility with it, either through a dedicated port or an official adapter. The GameCube was also the first console to master the wireless controller, with the fantastic Wavebird. Game Boy Advance connectivity brought a second screen to many games, a feature that would inspire the core concept of the Wii U. Nearly every classic Nintendo franchise received new titles on the console, from Star Fox to F-Zero to Pokemon to Mario Golf, and many new franchises were created, such as Luigi's Mansion, Pikmin, Animal Crossing, and Metroid Prime. This is what I consider to be the peak of Nintendo's first-party software output. If the GameCube truly had a fatal flaw, that would be its lack of internet capabilities, something Nintendo is still behind the curve with to this day. That and the inability to play DVDs, which was a major selling point for Sony's PS2. While the GameCube did technically support online gaming with a broadband or modem adapter, only a small number of games supported it, while for the Xbox and PlayStation 2, online play was a staple for most multiplayer games. What is often forgotten is that the GameCube was Nintendo's last truly traditional console. The Wii was basically a GameCube with motion controls and better online support, and sold nearly 5 times as many units. In 2006, during the Wii's initial reveal at E3, then CEO of Nintendo of America, Reggie Fils-Aimé, stated that the feel of the game is what's hot, the look is secondary. And while he ended up being right, there's just something unique about a Nintendo console that wasn't underpowered. By no means was the GameCube a complete failure. Selling over 20 million units is a success, but relative to its competition, the GameCube was considered a disappointment. Today, however, 20 years after the console's initial launch, we can more easily appreciate just how special the console was. With the GameCube, Nintendo truly tried to give players exactly what they wanted. Major criticisms of the Nintendo 64, such as the cartridges, a lack of mature games, and the non-traditional controller design, were all addressed. The GameCube deserved a better reputation, but oftentimes, we don't truly appreciate something until it's gone. In the late 90s, Nintendo had lost its market share to Sony, which really stung considering the two companies almost worked together. While Nintendo had been the king of the 2D era, the 3D era was not going according to plan. The Nintendo 64 was popular, but not as popular as Nintendo was used to their consoles being. Contrary to popular belief, however, this was still a very successful era for Nintendo, as the Game Boy and Game Boy Color were easily the best-selling handhelds, and the 64 did sell 33 million units. When Nintendo started development on their next console, codenamed Dolphin, they ran into some issues. Silicon Graphics, the company behind the CPU in the Nintendo 64, was imploding. The company president resigned after partying too hard in front of potential clients. The founder and CEO of the company had issues, with the founder eventually selling his shares and leaving. Former employees started a new company called ArtX, which was acquired by ATI shortly after, and is now part of AMD. Nintendo hired ArtX to work on the processor for the Dolphin, and the rest was history. At the 1999 E3 conference, Nintendo announced their next-gen console with an expected launch of late 2000. Nintendo was pushing the power of the Dolphin, with Howard Lincoln, former chairman of the company, even going as far to say that the Dolphin's graphics will equal or exceed anything Sony can come up with for the PlayStation 2. After the Nintendo 64 was criticized for using cartridges, the Dolphin made the jump to optical discs, to which the E3 crowd applauded. Despite not showing actual hardware or even any games, the announcement itself was enough to build hype for the system, even after Sony and Sega unveiled their next-gen consoles first. In March of 2000, another challenger approached, Microsoft. The Xbox was created to directly compete with Sony, as well as push online gaming into the mainstream with Xbox Live. Microsoft had tried to acquire Sega, but after Bill Gates opposed the idea, they tried something crazier. They came to Nintendo with an offer to buy the company. After numerous meetings and counter-offers, Microsoft eventually realized it wasn't going to happen and decided to build their own console in-house. After announcing the Xbox and showing off a prototype, Microsoft approached Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi one last time with another offer to buy or partner with Nintendo. But again, he declined their offer. In the span of a few years, Nintendo had the potential to partner up with both Sony and Microsoft on a console, and their rejection led to the video game landscape we have today. At E3 2000, Nintendo offered no new information on the Dolphin. Not wanting to be overshadowed by their competition, Nintendo used their own show, Space World, to announce that the Dolphin was actually called the GameCube, and they finally showed it off, along with games and demos. The GameCube shown at Space World was slightly different than the final version. The controllers had a red start button, a blue A button, and a green B button that was shaped like the X and Y buttons. Here's the final controller design for reference. As for the actual console, the unique cube appearance was nearly identical to the final product, although the announced pink color would be replaced with Spice Orange. A major complaint during the Nintendo 64 era was how Mario was basically the only character in his universe to get games. So Nintendo shocked everyone when they unveiled Luigi's Mansion, a game featuring Luigi as the main character. No Mario title at launch was pretty unexpected, but to many, it was a welcome breath of fresh air. There were some tech demos showing off the GameCube's graphical capabilities, and coming from the Nintendo 64, they looked fantastic. A new Metroid game was teased, and then the grand finale was shown. It was a Zelda demo featuring Link confronting Ganondorf. The art style was very similar to Ocarina of Time's, yet looked so much better. The 54,000 people in attendance were in awe, and the GameCube was looking very promising. That said, the console did have its detractors early on. Many felt like the GameCube resembled a childish toy with silly color schemes. In response, Nintendo signed a deal with Capcom for future Resident Evil games, and 2 horror games originally planned for the Nintendo 64 Resident Evil 0 and Eternal Darkness, were transferred to the GameCube. The kids who played Mario when they were 6 are now 28. They still want to play Mario, but they want some other stuff. Our industry has matured. We're like the movie industry. You see R-rated movies and M-rated games, said Perrin Kaplan, Vice President of Marketing at the time. At E3 2001, shortly before the GameCube's launch, Shigeru Miyamoto showed off Super Smash Bros. Melee for the first time, which would eventually become an all-time classic. He then showed more of Luigi's Mansion, and then gave a presentation on the final variant of the GameCube controller along with the Wavebird. The Luigi's Mansion demo was very impressive, as the graphics looked very advanced and loading times nearly non-existent. Pikmin was then showed off for the first time, and it was also announced that a non-Japanese developer, Retro Studios, would be working on the new 3D Metroid title. To cap the event off, Nintendo announced a launch price of $199 and a launch date of September 14th in Japan and November 5th in North America. The GameCube was almost ready. Exactly 1 year after announcing the console, Nintendo gave one last presentation for it at Space World 2001. However, they faced some backlash after showing a teaser for a future Zelda game, which would eventually become The Wind Waker. After expecting another Zelda like Ocarina of Time, which was what was basically shown as a demo a year prior, the drastically different art style of the game rubbed people the wrong way, and further drove the idea that the GameCube was a childish console. Miyamoto said that he thought it wasn't wise to talk about something before having the chance to test it. Only playing can you judge a game, and after E3 2002, when you all will be able to play with the new Zelda, we will talk again about it. Of course, he ended up being right, as The Wind Waker ended up being one of the greatest games of all time, but the initial backlash was so strong that it ended up affecting the casual perception of the GameCube. Despite the backlash, most people were still excited for the console, as it was not only more powerful than the PlayStation 2, but also was the cheapest console ever released when adjusting for inflation. In Japan, the GameCube released on September 14th with 3 launch titles: Luigi's Mansion, Super Monkey Ball, and Wave Race Blue Storm.
Good one. Turbo's all yours. Nice. Good. All right. Turbo's all yours.
While all 3 games were very well received, the launch lineup was criticized for being too small and lacking the firepower that Nintendo 64's launch had. There was no game here on the level of Super Mario 64. A month and a half later, however, Pikmin released, adding another very strong game to the lineup. Without that killer game, however, the GameCube failed to meet initial sales expectations and was well behind the PlayStation 2. On November 21st, Super Smash Bros. Melee was released along with Jet Black and Spice Orange color variants of the console. It worked. Nearly 150,000 consoles were sold that week alone, and over 350,000 copies of Melee as well. Unfortunately for Nintendo, the US launch ended up being poorly timed. The terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 had a serious negative impact on the American public, as well as the economy. Nintendo's share prices had fallen by 12%, and it was simply a bad time to promote a new game console. Although it was postponed by 2 weeks, the GameCube did launch on November 18th, 2001 in North America. Nintendo spent $75 million on their marketing budget for the US alone, hoping to compete with their new rival Microsoft. The ads were pretty surreal, with a heavy emphasis on the cube aspect of the console. Unfortunately for Nintendo, Bill Gates spent $500 million on marketing, and even got Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson to promote the Xbox. The GameCube's launch was actually pretty successful. When adjusted for inflation, the GameCube had higher first quarter sales than the PS2, Wii U, Xbox 360, PS3, and many other consoles of the past and future. Unfortunately, however, the Xbox sold even more, 1.53 million units compared to the GameCube's 1.26 million. The GameCube's greatest strength was its library. Eventually, in 2002, the GameCube got its flagship Mario game, Super Mario Sunshine, which was praised at launch. The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker ended up being a massive hit. Despite the initial backlash it received, the game sold very well and was loved by critics and players. Other great games for the system include Metroid Prime 1 and 2, Resident Evil 4, originally a GameCube exclusive, The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess, Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, Mario Kart: Double Dash, Soul Calibur 2, Pikmin 2, Fire Emblem: Path of Radiance, F-Zero GX, Pokemon Colosseum, Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness, Kirby Air Ride, Beyond Good and Evil, Super Monkey Ball 2, Skies of Arcadia, Tales of Symphonia, Beautiful Joe, Super Mario Strikers, Mario Golf Toadstool Tour, the Baton Kaitos titles. What's crazy is that I'm just scratching the surface of the GameCube's library with this selection of games. The sheer quantity of 9 out of 10 and 10 out of 10 quality titles is what makes the GameCube such a great console. In its 6-year span, the system received some of the greatest video games ever created. Let's take a look at the GameCube controller. It may look unorthodox in appearance, but in hand it fits perfectly and is incredibly ergonomic. The analog and digital trigger buttons were the standout. The L and R buttons could be pushed down all the way for a click, which was a digital input, but pushing the buttons down with varying pressure gave developers options to use analog controls for games. For example, in racing games, the R button was commonly used for acceleration. The A button was centered and was the most used button for accepting inputs. For some people, the design of these face buttons was a turnoff, and it was common for people to prefer third-party titles on the PlayStation 2 with the DualShock 2 controller. However, upon getting used to the GameCube controller's design, it is, in my opinion, much better than Sony's. Clicking A easily and then sliding your finger up, left, or right from the A button for Y, B, or X was incredibly pleasing. You don't have to look down at the controller due to the unique shape and position of each button, whereas the PlayStation 2 controller has 4 identical feeling face buttons instead. Of course, today every modern controller is more similar to Sony's, but in my opinion, the positioning of the buttons on the GameCube controller was the best there ever was. It just takes some getting used to. The analog control stick was also fantastic. The ridge around the control stick was an octagon, and gave the stick 8 sharp points to rest in. This allowed for incredibly precise movements, helped with muscle memory, and in games like Super Monkey Ball 2, the GameCube version ends up being superior because the PlayStation 2 controller lacks that precision with its control stick. There's a reason the GameCube controller is still the controller of choice for competitive Smash players, as it's one of the most precise and comfortable controllers ever created. Its only downsides are its lackluster D-pad, which is pretty poor for 2D games, only having one bumper button, and the C-stick, which has a very small top leading to less precise inputs. The console itself was taller than its competition, but much smaller overall, and it had some cool technical aspects such as a dedicated digital output chip. The original version of the GameCube has a digital out port, which can be used to output a 480p resolution with component cables, compared to the fuzzy 480i displayed from the regular composite cables. Even in 480i, the component cables look considerably better. I play my GameCube on a CRT TV, and through the component cables the picture quality is terrific. Of course, on a modern flat-screen TV, the image is going to be stretched across millions of pixels, resulting in a worse looking image and input lag. But when playing on a TV the GameCube was meant to be played on, it's easy to see just how powerful the system was for its time. While only $30 at the time, today the GameCube component cables go for over $200, due to how rare they are. Later GameCube models removed the digital port entirely, but for those models that had it, the graphics the system put out were very impressive. Games like F-Zero GX still look impressive today. The GameCube featured a handle on the back, which was pretty unique. The Game Boy player was basically a Game Boy Advance that needed to be attached to the bottom of the GameCube for power. This allowed you to play Game Boy games on the GameCube on your TV, which was a cool feature, although it wasn't as feature-rich as the Super Game Boy from the SNES era. There was also a Game Boy Link cable accessory, allowing you to connect your Game Boy Advance to the GameCube. This gave you a second screen for some games, unlocked different items, and could also be used as a controller for the Game Boy player. Games like The Legend of Zelda 4 Swords Adventures took full advantage of this feature. Popular accessories included the GameCube microphone, used mostly for Mario Party titles. There was a 2006 game titled Odama that used the microphone to control your army. The game is essentially a feudal Japan-themed pinball game, a very unique concept that has slipped under the radar today. The DK bongos were used for the Donkey Konga games and a few other Donkey Kong titles. Think of Guitar Hero, but with bongos and a Nintendo theme. Hori released a controller meant for the Game Boy player in Japan, which features an improved D-pad. It's shaped just like a Super Nintendo controller, only with GameCube buttons and button placement. A few different revisions of the GameCube released, including special editions based on games. The main colors were Indigo, Jet Black, and Platinum, with limited gold releases and Spice Orange in Japan. Despite its early success, GameCube sales plummeted after the first year. During the holiday season, sales would spike back up, but each year that spike would be smaller, and sales throughout the rest of the year were just not great. By 2006, the GameCube was barely selling at all, and then the Wii released and gave Nintendo the market share back. Unfortunately for Nintendo, the PlayStation 2 and Xbox simply received more third-party support, and while the Xbox barely sold more than the GameCube, the PS2 blew both of them away. It had more third-party games, better online support, and was simply the most popular option. By beating both Nintendo and Microsoft to market, and avoiding Sega's mistakes with the failed Dreamcast, the PlayStation 2 dominated. And so, Nintendo's last powerful console died a quiet death. Its last big release was The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, which was the Zelda game fans seemed to want all along, using the GameCube's power to create a realistic-looking Zelda game rather than the cel-shaded look of The Wind Waker. The game's release was delayed, however, and ended up being a Wii launch title with motion controls, but it also released on the GameCube so Nintendo could keep their promise. The last GameCube game released was Madden NFL 08, and then it was over. Despite its death in 2007, the GameCube remains relatively popular today, if underappreciated. The re-release of GameCube controllers for Smash 4 and Smash Ultimate sold very well, and Super Smash Bros. Melee is still the most widely played competitive Smash title. Tournaments today in 2021 still use GameCubes, GameCube controllers, and CRT TVs. It's easy to see the GameCube's influence on future Nintendo hardware. For one, the Wii was essentially a GameCube, only with a new controller. Both consoles are nearly identical power-wise. The original Wii model was backwards compatible with GameCube games, and also had 4 GameCube controller ports. Many games like Mario Kart Wii and Super Smash Bros. Brawl allowed use of the GameCube controller in place of the Wiimote. The Wii U featured a gamepad controller with a screen. When looking at the GameCube with a Game Boy Advance connected, it's easy to see the parallels. Without the Wii U, we wouldn't have the Switch today. The GameCube's influence goes beyond surface level. Nintendo's decision to go all in on the GameCube rather than team up with Microsoft helped create the video game landscape we see today. This era was crucial for setting up the future. It was the beginning of Sony's domination, the nail in the coffin for powerful Nintendo consoles, and it brought us the rise of Microsoft's Xbox. When it released, the GameCube was a powerful console, capable of producing some of the greatest graphics ever seen in video games. It had incredible first-party releases, and has arguably the greatest library of any console ever. So what went wrong? Unfortunately, the timing of its release, along with public perception misjudging the console based on its colorful design, led to underwhelming sales, which resulted in a lack of third-party support, which caused Nintendo to switch gears radically with the Wii. However, the GameCube was simply genius. It was a small, compact and modern design that has aged well. It had innovative accessories, a fantastic controller, and gave the world some of Nintendo's greatest works of art. While on the surface it may seem like a disappointment, if you owned a GameCube, you had an extraordinary time. The most important part of a game console is its library of games, and the GameCube had too many classics to count. While the GameCube is dead, its community isn't, and its legacy is immortal. It may have never gotten the recognition it deserved, but as time moves forward, more and more people are starting to realize just how awesome every console from that 6th generation was. In the early online era, when games needed to be fully polished and complete to release, split-screen multiplayer was still alive, and studios were pumping out all-time classics, we likely didn't realize just how good we had it. Perhaps it's nostalgia clouding my judgment, but in my opinion, this was the greatest era of gaming, and the GameCube will forever be my console of choice.